Hi everyone and welcome to Hit the Apex this week. We are on to our second leg of the triple header for the Formula 1 Championship. We've got the French Grand Prix to wrap up for you this week and of course preview the Austrian Grand Prix as well ahead in a couple of days' time. So without further ado, we've got plenty to cover as well as the digest and some other little bits as well between our review and the preview. But yeah, Baden, we're still in the thick of it, you know. I guess first blood to Lewis Hamilton in this triple header. Can Ferrari Sebastian Vettel strike back come Austria? We'll talk a bit about that later, but going to France, yeah, it was a dominant display, wasn't it?
Yeah, Ferrari not without its chances, but that came to a head pretty rapidly at turn one, and good salvage drive from Vettel, and Kimi Räikkönen at least kept himself in that equation, so it wasn't a complete disaster for them. But Mercedes, really from that Friday, it looked like they were just dominant, and probably only that collision in the first turn denied them a 1-2, and Lewis Hamilton just hitting that kind of form, which we probably hadn't seen to date, where he's just in a league of his own.
Yeah, I mean, Mercedes introduced that Phase 2.1 power unit. I mean, Phase 2 just sounds like some Marvel. At least it wasn't as bad as Marvel's Phase 2, I'll give him that.
They are the Germans, after all. Is they going to do some kind of evil deed as a duration of the season?
So basically that was their silver bullet, you could say, for the weekend. And also, let's not deny the fact this is the second race out of 3 where they've had those reduced tread depths on the Pirelli tyres, and now Mercedes have also come out and dominated here as well, so that's probably another thing. But yeah, you know, Mercedes finally bringing that upgrade with them this weekend, and yeah, it's put them in front. But overall, the whole weekend, a bit of a logistical disaster, you could say, the French Grand Prix, from all the commentary surrounding it. You know, it was very hard to get to the circuit with only one road leading to and from, traffic jams, and then, of course, even the track itself just confusing a lot of drivers. And we'll talk about how they're looking to remove that chicane at the end of the Mistral Straight for next year, because that's how they have it for everything else, basically. But for Formula 1, they decided to introduce it. But yeah, it just confused the hell out of people.
And confused the hell out of people, but it seemed to be the source of much of the drama on race days. So there's a case to be made for its retention, and you could say that it comes down more to the spectacle and the speed those cars carry, but it wasn't quite the disaster when it came to on track. It might have seemed a bit just dull and like in a carpet of sea, essentially, from that practice running. So it did definitely get a pass mark overall.
Yeah, overall, I guess it was, and we'll go over it now. So Lewis Hamilton, 75th career pole position for him. He led from the start basically every lap. It was a chaotic first lap, and I sort of saw it coming with all the cars basically just everywhere. And it started off, I guess, with Sebastian Vettel getting a really strong start, and we knew that he would do that on those ultra soft tyres. Everyone else was on super softs, and basically he just had nowhere to go, and ended up locking up his wheels and colliding with Valtteri Bottas. So fortunately, I guess it didn't eliminate them from the race there and then. They both were able to rejoin the race under the safety car. They had pit stops to repair the damage. Sebastian given a 5-second penalty, of course, to take in the second stop, which he ended up doing. But everyone coming out saying that it should have been harsher. I mean, for me, when looking at the incident again, it seemed like he had nowhere to go. He had no choice. It wasn't as brazen as what some people are making it out to be. So, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Was it justified, or should it have been more harsher, like some people are saying?
It's fairly marginal. The way that first corner creeps up, it's not the longest run into that left-hander, and he probably was, for all intents, ahead of Bottas until he broke perhaps a smidge early, and Bottas with that late entry. So it was just a natural collision course, just the position that he was in, boxed into that run down into T1, and I guess more so for the case of what it did do to Bottas, regardless of the fact there was contact. He's got those other individuals up in arms, and you know, maybe a 10-second penalty would have been optimal as a sanction there, but I think anything more than that really wouldn't have fit that crime. And then that aftermath, of course, the not the hypocrisy, but a bit of tongue-in-cheek banter from Max Verstappen, just to highlight what a storm in a teacup this little situation was.
Yeah, saying that they should criticise Seb more than they do Max or whatever. Max having a good weekend again, claiming another podium, avoiding that first lap chaos, and he ended up coming in second at the end of that first lap, which was good to see. So great race for him. But yeah, going back to, I guess, Bottas and Vettel, Seb ended up having a strong recovery, you could say. Came back as high as, I think, fourth he was, but then ended up losing that position, to Kimi Räikkönen, who was on the better tyres, better strategy, and then Daniel Ricciardo in the end as well got him too. So fifth, I guess, not bad considering the situation at the start of the race, and for Valtteri Bottas it could have been a bit better too, but botched second pit stop saw him only finish seventh in the end. So I guess at least they were able to score points. But I guess what you were saying about the criticism against Seb, the fact that the penalty didn't seem harsh enough because he just carved up the entire field when he came out on those soft tyres, and I guess it was probably the most entertaining part of the race, so you don't want to take away from that at least.
Yeah, really, for entertainment there, Vettel really, for his recovery, that was something that crucial, considering the swing against him there from that very bare lead he took into the race, 1 point. So it's obviously back to where he was a few weekends ago before Canada there, and he's probably been a bit unfortunate since those opening two victories. It seems as though circumstances have just conspired against him most weekends, whilst for Bottas, this one, even though he's been driving as well as he ever has, probably puts that line through him as far as championship contender. He just hasn't been at all lucky, and the way it's going, I don't know when that first victory is going to come for him this season.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that, I guess, he and Daniel Ricciardo seem to be not equal, but in that same vicinity on points. But Ricciardo, with 2 wins under his belt, still is a long way off, I guess, those leading two guys now. So, perhaps they'd need a few more results to go in their favour to be back in contention. But yeah, it's at the moment 14 points between Seb and Lewis at the top there, and then I think it's like 30 or something back to the next guy, which is now Valtteri Bottas after Daniel Ricciardo after that last race.
Yeah, well, for those guys, they really need to solidify in the run to that mid-season break, because it's becoming clearer, despite the competitiveness on any given weekend from a Ricciardo or even a Bottas, if Hamilton's not firing, that these victories between Hamilton and Vettel, they're just edging clear. So I think that it's coming down yet again to that, I guess you could call it a bit of an iconic rivalry these two are now forging.
Yeah, well, we said this a lot last year, that we never got to see these two fight like this when they were at their previous teams, being McLaren and Red Bull. Even though they were championship contenders at the time, it wasn't as, I guess, direct as it is now. But yeah, it's great to see that. And we stressed, I guess, last week going into the triple header and also to France that, both of them have got to sort of keep wheel to wheel, or just try and keep the points as equal as possible coming out the other side if both of them are going to be a chance going into that mid-season break. So 1 point to Lewis there now. Can Seb bounce back, or will one driver walk away with the rest of the races in that triple header? So it's going to be really crucial, Austria, this one. And Silverstone, we already know how strong Hamilton is there normally, and that's that third race, of course, with the modified Pirelli tyres too. So yeah, it's going to be a big one, you could say, this weekend.
Yeah, it really puts the onus on Ferrari to strike back, and based on 2017, you could make a case there that very unfortunate for Sebastian Vettel not to have taken victory. Remembering Valtteri Bottas off the line, it was very dubious whether he had indeed jumped that fifth light, and just across the board it seemed as though Hamilton had one of those weekends where he was listless. And for Ferrari, if they can strike back here, it's all game on. But I think if Hamilton were to emerge from the coming fortnight with a trio of victories, that's really going to be reminiscent of the way the situation panned out last season.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess wrapping up those top guys now, Kimi Räikkönen was the third guy on the podium. I mean, it was a bittersweet race for him, because he got a poor start again. He's not made up any positions this year off the start, which has been talked about a lot. And then again this weekend, even though he was on the ultra soft tyres like his teammate, he wasn't able to get off the line very well and just dropped positions. I guess he was a bit lucky with the safety car and the fact that Bottas and Vettel were further back in the field. He made the pit stop. He was quicker than Seb on the tyres. He passed him, and then eventually, he was able to hold on to third, a lonely third. But I guess it wasn't probably the best race for Kimi again.
Oh, just one that he'll take to the bank, and he's been there or thereabouts this season. But as far as his contrast to the future, and you see Charles Leclerc, who is now race after race putting it the Sauber above and beyond where it should be. Compare it to the benchmark now, Marcus Ericsson. It's really becoming quite definitive, that relation, and you can see Leclerc constantly in those points, and all signs from the talk is that the Finn will probably be facing his final season after about 4 near misses, you could say, pretty much since he returned to Ferrari in 2014. There's been speculation, but it's the strongest it's ever been that he will finally be shown the door and will have a fresh new face at Maranello come 2019.
Yeah, well, before the race, there was a lot of chatter about the fact that Ferrari had made up their mind about Charles Leclerc, and I guess, it seems a bit contra to what they normally do. They're not, they're not normally ones to go after a young driver who's, it's unfair to say that Leclerc's unproven, but the fact that he's only had 1 season under his belt, I fully endorse if they do that'd be the right thing to do. Get him in the car quickly, it'll give him a chance to develop his skills and also to be nurtured, I guess, by the team and everything. And I guess this early on, he wouldn't be too much of a threat to Vettel anyway, as far as championships are concerned, and I don't think Leclerc would be the kind of guy to do that. So, he could easily slot into that position that Kimi's in now, as being not the rear gunner, but being more the supporting act, but also be in that sort of Valtteri Bottas type of position where he's actually contributing to the total points tally and, Constructors' Championship, which, as good as Kimi's been over the past few years, that's where Ferrari have really lacked, is both cars scoring a solid haul of points. And I know that Ferrari themselves have made some poor strategic calls which have cost those points for Kimi, but hopefully with a driver like Leclerc on board, that they would actually reconsider that and perhaps, be in that position where, like Mercedes, they can go after 1-2s every race, because we haven't really, even though Ferrari have been strong for the last year and a half, more often than not, we don't see them finish 1-2. I think maybe Hungary last year was one race I remember. Monaco as well was only 2 races I can recall that they actually finished 1-2. Considering how strong they've been this year, and of course Seb's had 3 wins, it would be great if we could see some more Ferrari 1-2s, and if it's not going to happen, then hopefully in the future it'll happen with Charles Leclerc on board if they do decide to go for him as well. So, let's get it back on track anyway with I guess, being the French Grand Prix, we had 3 French drivers on the grid, and all 3 of them were involved in a Turn 1 incident with each other. That was, you couldn't have scripted it any better. That with Romain Grosjean basically triggering it, he had a shocking weekend. He got into Q3, of course, and then crashed in Q3 into the wall, which would have been pretty embarrassing in front of your home crowd. Then triggered an incident which saw Pierre Gasly and Esteban Ocon eliminated both on the first lap. And for something like that, Grosjean was hit with a 5-second penalty. So, talk about penalties not being harsh enough. Clearly, it could have been a bit more, considering 2 cars were eliminated as a result. Whereas Vettel, both cars got away with it, and he got 5 seconds, and they thought he should have had his head cut off.
Yeah, I don't think those 2 really add up. And you consider, again, just for where the notional Frenchman, I guess you could call him Swiss as well, in Grosjean, it just continues this annus horribilis he's experiencing, and you can see he's trying really hard to put himself in places to make it happen, since he's literally pointless now 8 rounds in. So he he's probably a little bit trigger happy there, and it's just a shame it had to come at the expense of his compatriots, and the local interest dwindled rather rapidly from that point.
Well, you use the words trigger happy. I mean, for a driver of Grosjean's experience, he's been on the grid for a long time now. He had that amazing run with Lotus in 2013 with the podiums, and we thought that was when he had matured and everything. To now resort back to being trigger happy, it's like, come on, like, you were once upon a time a really quick driver, you started to develop your racecraft and everything, and now you're just suddenly back to square one. So that's where it's like, if you're not going to improve, then you might as well just pack your bags and be on your way, because it could probably do with a better driver in it if he's not going to improve, Grosjean. So a shame though, like, you'd like to see him do better than he is. And I guess for Gasly, Ocon, he had an amazing run when he made his career, the start of his career with Manor, all the way to, I think, the Brazilian Grand Prix last year. Didn't have a DNF to his name, and now I think within the space of 9 races he's had 3 or something, because he had 2 earlier he had Baku this year, and then of course now here in France, and then Brazil last year too. So sort of unravelling and a bit unfortunate, considering those guys would have had pace to be in the mix for points as well.
Yeah, for Gasly, it's probably the 3rd time this season he's been involved in a bit of contact that's ended his race very early, so he's just unfortunate, and it doesn't deny he's still got a massive future ahead, but it's just frustrating for the trio on home soil that it had to end this way, but they've just got to regroup, and it's just one of those things at a new circuit and the dimensions of that layout. It was fairly inevitable, and those other guys who ran wide into turn 3 probably count themselves fortunate to have avoided a similar fate.
Yeah, well, it just, when I saw it free practice or whatever on Friday night, and thought, I can't even pay attention to what's going on because of all these lines. It's just so hard to keep up. But then eventually, as the weekend sort of panned out, it became easier and easier. So good job, I guess, with the camera side and the directing of the race to make it viewable at least. But yeah, it was confusing at the beginning. So but going back to the race itself, Carlos Sainz ended up 3rd at the end of the first lap after the carnage that we had, and we thought, oh, this could be great. We could see him finally get up there, get a good result for Renault, being, with no French drivers left, of course, in the race. Renault, the French team, could they do well? But no, he ended up getting passed by Daniel Ricciardo after the safety car came in. But then at the end of the race, he was having power unit issues, I think, with his MGK, I believe, and I guess the virtual safety car that came out at the end of the race for Lance Stroll's tyre blowout ended up saving the points finish that Sainz had with P8, and then Nico Hülkenberg P9. So Renault at least were able to fly the tricolour at the end of the day to score double points.
Yeah, they certainly were, in lieu of any particular customer who probably had their worst weekend of the season, if that can be actually believed. So for Renault, they're just chipping away nicely, keeping themselves very much in that likelihood of P4 in the constructors, and a bit of chatter whether they're going to turn their heads towards 2019. They're almost at a point where they're looking quite secure in that position, so you wouldn't blame them at all if, at least from that mid-season break, they more or less just keep up with the current specification, and that talk of that new component coming to Austria, which Red Bull themselves, hot on the heels of that switch to Honda for next season. They'll be the only team within the Renault fold they're not opting for that immediately. Well,
I think McLaren are not going to be taking it either, off the back of they don't want to take a penalty this early in the season for it. So so good boost for Renault there, which we'll talk about anyway when we head to the Austria part of this one. But for Ricciardo, we thought, passing Sainz, he'd be on the podium too. Unfortunately, no. He had front wing damage and ended up losing that 3rd to Kimi Räikkönen, and he came home 4th in the end, which was still pretty good for Red Bull to have both cars, 2nd and 4th. But it was a bit weird. We wondered, how did he get the front wing damage? And I think it was just a piece of debris that got caught, or tyre marbling that got caught in the front wing, which basically hampered his pace throughout the remainder of it.
Yeah, on account of that, who knows how long it was affecting him, but pretty solid drive to bring it home in P4 again. Maybe not up to scratch with Verstappen, you could say. It was just more of a positive, if anything, from Red Bull's perspective, that the Dutchman had his second consecutive clean race, and that's something we haven't been able to say in quite some time. So they'd be pretty happy with their haul, even though we had the likes of Vettel and Bottas out of the equation.
Yeah, they were sort of worried because of the power nature of this circuit that they wouldn't be as close to Mercedes and Ferrari as they would have thought. And then I guess the same will be said about Austria too, given the fact that it's more of a power track, and also they're adding that third DRS zone, which we'll talk about as well a bit later. So whether on on their home turf can they close the gap a little bit more remains to be seen. But yeah, great result I guess for Red Bull overall. Just gutted Dan didn't get on the podium. So, but another driver who was disappointed with himself, as we were saying, is Charles Leclerc, because he started in 8th with the Q3. First time Sauber got into Q3 since the 2015 Australian Grand Prix with Felipe Nasr. So really good result there. In qualifying, he was highest as 6th at one point in the race after the, the safety car shenanigans and everything. But then, yeah, ended up dropping to 10th because he tried to pass Magnussen, went a bit wide, I think, or just went too deep into a corner, allowed Nico Hülkenberg to take advantage and ended up taking that position for the rest of the race. So still, he scored a point there, but, you know, the fact that for a team like Sauber, for a backmarker team who's not been in that competitive position, to feel disappointed with even just scoring a point, I think it's a hallmark of someone who's going to go far, you could say. And perhaps, you know, that's why you could say he's ready for Ferrari, that, you know, he's got his eyes on the prize and he's very mature and calm about it.
Yeah, he's a pretty harsh taskmaster, and a bit of wisdom there beyond his years. That sign of a once-in-a-generation talent could be on the scale of a Senna or a Schumacher or a Hamilton. So back to that earlier point you made about him being a safe number 2, I wouldn't be so sure that he's going to be gliding in place of Raikkonen and just being a handy points accumulator. He could be one of those drivers who immediately gnaws away at the established order, just as Hamilton did for Alonso in 2007. So it could be something which gets some fireworks going within Ferrari, and we probably haven't seen that too often lately. Even 2014 you had Alonso and Raikkonen there, but they were nowhere, so it never really got to be realised. But you can't think of the last time Ferrari's ever had a situation where they've had 2 drivers who are pretty much equals.
Not Mansell and Prost when they were together.
Yeah, that was 30 years ago. That's a long time ago.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
More recently.
Yeah, more recently, of
Memory.
course. Yeah. Well, no, not even Massa Schumacher in that first season.
It wasn't really on par as such.
So, but yeah, no, what you're saying is a fair point. I mean, I would have thought that as a safe bet, yeah, he would still be good. But if he was to take it to Seb immediately, I mean, that would be even better, because, you know, we got so much hype around Max Verstappen, and I feel like, you know, he's just, as good as he is, those inconsistencies haven't really done it for me just yet. But Leclerc, the way he's shown himself at Sauber so far in just 8 races, I reckon he could be a lot more composed and more calm, get the results as well as being that amazing driver. So it's really exciting to see Leclerc, Ocon, you know, these guys. It's so good to see that, you know, I mean, what you talked about last week in that article that you wrote, being your 20th year watching F1 and the generational change, like that got me thinking, because, you know, we grew up sort of with drivers like Raikkonen and Alonso and Schumacher and all that. And this is the first time that with the grid that we've got, we're starting to see more of these, you know, drivers that are younger than us coming through. So it's almost like a whole new generation. It's almost like our second generation that we're going through with Formula One. So it's just really exciting to see these young guys coming in, doing so well. Like, it sucked when through F2, GP2 or whatever, guys like Palmer and Van Dorn, they've come through, but they've not really made an impact. But now we've got guys like Gasly, Ocon, Leclerc, and they're making an impact, and that's, you know, really good for the future of the sport.
Yeah, I think that it's just quite overdue when you consider that holding pattern we had in the middle part of this decade with the likes of Massa and Button, and now to an extent Alonso and Raikkonen, who are shadows of their former selves.
Well, both
and you
could
can
be.
see that they're clearly it's well and truly time to usher in the new talent. And if it does sound ruthless, then so be it. It's not like these guys haven't had their time in the sun. And I guess for these other teams, when they're meandering around the back, they've got nothing to lose by throwing them in and seeing if they've got what it takes.
Yeah, and just realised then, it could be possible that both those guys are not on the grid next year, Raikkonen and Alonso. So, 2 more world champions bow out together. So, but anyway, let's get things back on track. So Leclerc, disappointed with 10th, but, you could see that he's got that maturity about him, and, perhaps, big results with the Sauber could be still possible for the rest of the season. So we'll wait and see if he can do another Q3 or score even a top 6 finish. But I guess terrible race for Force India. Both cars out. We talked about Ocon, but Sergio Perez had engine troubles, which wasn't good. They lost points. No points for Williams either. We talked about Lance Stroll with that tyre blowout late in the race. I mean, was it during practice or qualifying where he was whinging about something on the radio again? He's like, tell me something, what to do. It almost sounded like Monaco last year. He's like, you're not giving me information. Give me information.
Sounds like every race at this point.
Yeah. And then McLaren too, which you alluded to before as well, the Renault customer having their worst weekend of the season. And Alonso not happy on the radio again. He's like, I've got no tyres. I got no pace. What am I doing? And it was kind of funny. Just as much as I want them to do well, I always love hearing an Alonso rant on the radio just for the insanity part of it.
And you think that moment 7 days earlier, he was on the top step at Le Mans. It's a little bit of a contrast.
Oh, yeah, and that would have obviously hurt him a bit too psychologically, given that 7 days ago he was... he won one of the biggest races in the world to come back to his McLaren and not even be in with a chance to fight for the points or whatever. So you'd hope that they'd turn it around. We already said that they're not going to take that upgrade in Austria because of the penalties and whatnot. So, yeah, it's going to be a big one for McLaren, I guess, coming into the next few races. And a bit on McLaren, actually, in the digest. But first, let's say driver of the day. I mean, controversial one for me, choosing Sebastian Vettel. He was voted the driver of the day in the online vote or whatever. But yeah, he put in a great drive to recover back to finish where he did in 5th. I still don't think he was that penalty, like the way he was beaten up about it. I still don't think that was justified. Like, yeah, he made a mistake, but it wasn't as brazen as what Verstappen does, for example. So Max doing his hoo-ha routine in the press conference is like, oh, well, maybe you should talk to Sebastian about it or whatever. He drove a good race, which is good to see.
Yeah, put some perspective on the situation. So I think that for Vettel, again, he was compromised, but there's nothing to see and move on. And he just shows that as much as Hamilton is hyped as the most complete driver, I think Sebastian Vettel probably deserves a lot more platitude than he currently receives. Yeah,
like ever since he came to Ferrari, that air of maturity about him since the Red Bull days and everything, he's certainly evolved since then. And, when you can reflect back on his career, like a lot of criticism was there around the fact that he was not good when it came to passing and overtaking and actually being a racer, because he won all his races from pole position. But yeah, these victories he's taken with Ferrari have certainly required him to do a lot more. And you could say that, yeah, France, like Abu Dhabi 2012, were great recovery drives from him, which could be championship defining.
Yeah, he's really starting to show those signs which you can associate with that 4 titles back in the day. Feels like such a long time ago, but he hasn't just looked as assured of himself in a long time.
You think that was a long time ago? How do you think Fernando Alonso feels? It was another age, basically. It was in another century. It is in another...
It wasn't another century. It's not like he was racing in the 80s.
No, but it feels like... It would feel like that way. Like, it's been more than a decade, but it feels more than that since he won those. So anyway, let's move it on to the digest, I guess, now, and going back to McLaren. And when I heard about this last week, it was shortly after we finished recording last week, and I was like, okay, the people who are reporting on this, I don't really trust, because it was like Channel 9 and Fox Sports, all the Australian publications. And then all of a sudden it blows up that McLaren have made a big offer to Daniel Ricciardo to come over to them. $20 million a season is the deal. And Ricciardo didn't confirm or deny that in France when he was quizzed about it. So a lot's been already made of it. The fact that given McLaren's situation and everything where they are, does Ricciardo really want to risk killing his career for it? Or could it possibly be a masterstroke in terms of how Lewis Hamilton, and this is what has been directly said, is that, could he do a Lewis Hamilton by leaving his team and going to Mercedes, or which in this case will be McLaren? So what's to make of this?
I don't see it happening. McLaren in its current state, it'd be better off, if anything, making a switch to Renault with the works power, the way that they're coming online the last 12 to 18 months. That's a much more realistic chance of equating to a Hamilton move within that works environment. I think McLaren, anytime under the current regs, they're going to be pretty much status quo, and a move to them probably 2021's when you'd be wanting to attract the likes of Ricciardo. And in the meantime, that talk of getting a Norris or one of those less established drivers in, that's probably befitting for McLaren's current state.
Well, let's throw a spanner into the works. I read on BT Sport this morning that apparently Kimi Raikkonen's a name that's come into the fold, and I'm like, what?
Speculating on every driver now.
No, but someone's brought this up, and I'm like, why? I thought he would just go into retirement after this, but apparently they want an experienced driver. Like they suggested a wholesale change where even Van Dorn's made the fall guy. They bring in Lando Norris and Kimi Raikkonen. I thought that was really puzzling. I'm like, okay.
There's no supporting arguments to that. It was merely an article saying that McLaren would like a driver of his calibre, so I don't think there's much to read into this.
Am I getting carried away? I don't think so. So, yeah, I mean, the fact that that's on the table for Dan, you're suggesting perhaps Renault's a better option anyway, but I guess it's sad the fact that, he wants to be at a Ferrari or a Mercedes, but that's not going to be able to happen this time round. Because I guess with Ferrari they're pursuing perhaps Leclerc now being the cheaper option, whereas with Dan you'd have to pay him a salary similar to Sebastian's, of course. I mean, this is a money game as well as a sport as well, so the fact that when the salaries come into it... I
find it hard to believe Ferrari couldn't afford his retainer though, so I think there's more to it than just income that's going to determine whether this guy who's won 2 races is not up to task and not worth a little bit of extra on the side when you can see what he's done. If that's not enough, then clearly nothing ever will be to crack that top 2 teams on the grid.
But at the same time, it's like, well, as good as it would be to have Ricciardo there, as we've said all the time, the fact that they've got this whole junior academy thing or whatever, isn't it time that they reward one of their junior drivers who've actually deserved to step up and everything? So, I mean, what's the point of having it all then if they're not going to have their young drivers promoted? So now, at the moment, I'm fully behind Leclerc moving up to Ferrari for next year. I think that would be the best thing to do, but it'd also seal in a long-term sort of future for Ferrari as well in the post-Vettel era.
I see, if anything, that it could be a slight delay. I don't think there's any chance of Ricciardo at Ferrari, but you could just see Leclerc doing one more season at Haas with Raikkonen, believe it or not, retained for 2019, 2020 and beyond. If Ferrari were being anything near their conservative selves from the past, just give him that extra 12 months to mature. But I think the door's closed on anyone other than Leclerc being its future. Yeah,
basically. And with Ricciardo, like, there is still the chance he stays at Red Bull, you'd think. I mean, or just do a swap between he and Sainz, put Sainz in the Red Bull, and then Ricciardo over to Renault with Hülkenberg, Pierre Gasly another year at Toro Rosso, because there's not really any Red Bull junior drivers out there of age that can come into Toro Rosso. So otherwise, what do they go back get Jean-Eric Verne or something?
That's the talk. So
yeah,
see just like Hartley gets called in after 6 years in the wilderness, and then another discard after what he's gone on to in Le Mans, WEC and Formula E, I don't think he's really got much incentive to walk away from a good thing he's got going there.
Yeah, exactly. So, it doesn't seem like Hartley will stay around next year, unfortunately. But yeah, I guess everything will start to unravel. This is the time of year heading into that middle of the season. We understand perhaps that Lewis Hamilton will announce his future perhaps at his home Grand Prix, perhaps.
Anything Bottas will by extension be retained.
Yeah, so you'd foresee the next 2 years at least to be status quo for Mercedes. Ferrari perhaps with that one change to Leclerc, if possible. Red Bull, it's a big unknown, I guess, with Ricciardo. That's the big play, I guess, at the moment. But I kind of like your idea then of a swap between Sainz and Ricciardo, between Renault and Red Bull, if it turns out. But Renault could say, no, we want to keep Sainz.
They'll be happy to pay out whatever that would be to buy him out of that long-term servitude. And I guess for Ricciardo, if he really was just wanting to weigh up his options, he might recommit, as you've mentioned in the past, through 2020 there and see what Honda does have, and that might be a time where his options open up a lot more.
Yeah, and you got to feel for him in that case because he just wants to win races, win championships, but the situation he is in, it's almost like that's not guaranteed. Like if he announced that, he's off to Mercedes next year, then it's like, oh yeah, you would have him as a favourite for winning the championship, but unfortunately with the uncertainty around Red Bull Honda, how they're going to fare, it's going to be like, well, it could be a possibility still. It's certainly more of a chance than if he goes to McLaren and see them flounder for the next few years before the big regulation change. Renault as well, would you be convinced, that they can make enough, let's say they have another year of development. Would you reckon 2020 could be a year that Renault are a chance for championships?
Oh, well, that's similar to what Hamilton did when Mercedes had probably the rawest speed package in 2013 and one more season, and they were just class of the field. So maybe 2020, 2021 with the new regulations, they'll be at full capacity, and Ricciardo would be willing to I guess, serve a year. They're just learning the car more than anything and being the lead driver from the time that they're ready to make that leap into Mercedes and Ferrari territory.
Interesting. But anyway, we'll continue on silly season talk another time anyway, because Red Bull and Honda, apparently the deal is not fully done yet. Like it was, you almost forget that last year Sauber and Honda were supposed to get into bed together, but that didn't end up happening, and apparently Red Bull are at that same stage with their deal with Honda that they've only agreed a memorandum of understanding, so it's not fully done yet, and I don't know what to make of this. Is this just fluff again from certain publications that, it could be a U-turn still in the works? But it's hard to see them going back to Renault now after
bridge is burned definitively.
After all that's happened. It's like, what's going to happen then if this MOU isn't honoured or whatever? Who do they go to afterwards? So it's a bit silly, but it's out there to perhaps worry certain parties that it might not happen and whatnot. So.
Or just bluster, I think, really. I think for Renault, Red Bull, when you see its future, they're clearly at a stage where they just got to try anything, and 2 years before the new regs come in, and if it does end up being a bit of a disaster, at least they've tried something different, and it could be pursued beyond that. But if not, then, there's the door, and they could make their exit at that time. So I think, and if anything, it's just signing on the dotted line to make all of this official. Yeah,
official, and finally we can move on from all this and look forward to 2019, whatever it is. And I guess you talked about Formula E with John-Eric Vernon and everything. We've heard that Susie Wolff is coming back into motorsport, not that she ever left, but in a team principal capacity at Venturi for Formula E, which is really good to hear. Following in the footsteps of her husband, you could say. Toto Wolff with Mercedes. She's now going to be the leader of that outfit, and we know Felipe Massa's going to be there next year as the driver too. So that's pretty exciting to see that, despite motherhood and everything, she's still got the passion to, look after the Dare to Be Different campaign, which is making huge waves around the world, which is really good to see, promoting women in motorsport. But now she's getting behind the reins of a Formula E team as well, which will be worth looking forward to see how that pans out.
Yeah, it's not the biggest surprise. You consider the F1 past was Manisha Colton-Born and Claire Williams, so clearly there's already a history there, and Wolff's own experience alongside a husband there, Venturi, they got the ties to Mercedes, don't they, there? So it would make sense in many respects.
I'm not too sure about that one.
Do they have Mercedes backing in any capacity? But
I'm
it
not
would certainly be logical.
I'm not too knowledgeable on Formula E, unfortunately.
Can't say I'm in the know, but on the basis, if they do, when Mercedes makes that entry in the next season or so, then you can see that very much it just makes sense on a lot of levels to have the Wolff clan overseeing everything with an oracle eye, you could say, like Yanis with the one corner here, one corner there, maybe scouting out options from Formula E, and we could
there was
from F1 into that category.
Speaking of the Wolff clan or whatever, there was that suggestion that perhaps Toto Wolff would be looking into buying out Force India. There's been some word on Force India this week. Vijay Mallya's come out of hibernation and took to Twitter with some statements about what's going on and everything. I couldn't really decipher it, but it doesn't change the situation the team are in. Basically, at the end of the day, they've got to sell the team, but they're being stubborn about the price and everything, and it's not very attractive to prospective buyers, what they're offering the team for. Yeah,
it gets to a point where Force India, if they're not going to relent anytime soon and they end up in a state like Manor was with that previous owner, Fitzpatrick, who refused to budge on anything reasonable, then they find themselves the entire workforce off the grid and unemployed. That's the situation facing Force India.
Yeah, it's not
unfortunate, to say, for the great people which do run the team behind that spectre of Vijay Mallya and Subhatra Roy.
Yeah, but that's the thing. No one understands the gravity of the situation where Force India could possibly go into administration sometime this year if, new buyers aren't found. And if these guys who, let's be honest, they're facing prison time, or one of them is already incarcerated, if they don't want to sell the team for what it's worth, then, someone's got to come and take control, just like
hostile takeover.
Take custody or whatever of this neglected child that is Force India. So enough of Vijay Mallya. At the start you could say that he's passionate about it, but with the whole what's panned out, it's like, well, that's it. You're basically killing the team now, and the team is doing really well, which is good to see, but you could jeopardise all of that by your stubbornness, which is going to be, as you say, on all the staff that work behind the scenes, the drivers, all the parties involved, sponsors and all that. That's not going to be good.
Yeah, it's a bit of a conflict, as much as you haven't got time for those at the top. When you go beneath the surface there, these people are extremely competent and they deserve every opportunity to continue under a new identity.
Yeah, so hopefully that can be sorted out sooner rather than later. We've heard about Andretti Autosport perhaps looking to invest, and a Rich Energy, that energy drinks company in the UK as well. Having mentioned Andretti, that would be really good if they would consider it. Having Andretti and Haas in there together. Andretti, of course, pretty global, you could say, these days, with that investment here in Australia with the Walkinshaw Group, and then of course the ties with United Autosports, which is owned by Zach Brown, who is boss at McLaren. So everyone it just brings all those synergies together and everything. But yeah, with Andretti, I think it's basically to do with future-proofing the sport, the budget caps and all that. If it's desirable, then they'll look at it.
Yeah, I think again it's that little period of unknown. Whoever does take a stake will be doing so with an eye on 2021, so you can understand some apprehension from those bidders, but at the same time they've got to be offered a reasonable arrangement there to go any further with it. So Force India probably in Malia, really not realising that they haven't got as much leverage as they wish to believe.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. I mean, if they have any leverage at all whatsoever. So let's go straight into it then. Now, preview of the Austrian Grand Prix and that second leg, as I said, of the triple header. Red Bull Ring, the Styrian Hills, it's picturesque. Perhaps more so than the French Grand Prix at the Paul Ricard circuit. But yeah, the quick turnaround, 7 days, are we going to separate the genuine contenders from the pretenders? Mercedes have dominated here since the race returned in 2014. Nico Rosberg won a pair of them. Then we had Lewis Hamilton, of course, in 2016 with that final lap incident that happened with Rosberg in their little title battle. And then last year it was Valtteri Bottas' second Grand Prix victory. And as you said before, with that fight with Sebastian Vettel all the way to the end, whether Bottas got away with a jump start, that, still a bit marginal, you could say. But yeah, it was another classic battle between Bottas and Vettel. But Vettel, and Ferrari, could this be the time that they strike back? And they won here in the last race that was staged before Austria dropped off the calendar with Michael Schumacher back in 2003. So could this be the year that they take that crucial win?
You see something like a Canada, where just as Austria, Mercedes had the recent real success, and then we were all really surprised by the way Ferrari came out and dominated there at Montreal. So I think that this is one where you can expect Ferrari to be, if anything else, keeping Mercedes extremely honest through Saturday. And I think that just having one of those more free-flowing classic layouts, it's really going to play into Ferrari's hands, and that they need to maximise those points, as we keep saying, with that tyre diameter regulation heading into Britain. They really just have to execute and bag as many points as possible. Yeah,
exactly. And I guess, speaking of the tyres, we're having a return to the 2018 spec Pirellis and the same compounds, the soft, super soft and ultra softs, like with France there, but Ferrari, of course, placing more emphasis on the ultra soft. So I guess it'll come down to qualifying first. Can they score pole position like Canada, of course, a circuit that Mercedes have dominated at the past. And I get the feeling that this could be, the weekend that they do take it, do a clean sweep like they did in Canada. So we know that Mercedes have got that upgrade on hand. So how close can Ferrari be once we go back to the proper 2018 spec tyres and, different conditions again to France as well. So, it's going to be an interesting one for those guys between Mercedes and Ferrari.
Yeah, I think it's really quite clear at this point that Red Bull, every now and again, they tend to capitalise on situations, but they need a lot to go right to have a look at victories. And between what Bottas displayed last season, I wouldn't put it past him to be the superior driver from that Silver Arrows camp. And for Vettel, he's really driving as well as he ever has. He too just needs a little bit of luck. So if anything, we could be in for a reprisal of 12 months ago.
Yeah, well, it would be great to see Bottas get up there, of course. Just unlucky with the way things have panned out. He should have won Baku. That's a given. I think everyone agrees there with that. So, yeah, this being a circuit that he's done well at, like even go back to when he was at Williams, he was on the podium, I think, every year before he made the switch to Mercedes, and then started second on the grid in 2014 when Felipe Massa took that pole. So, yeah, it's been a great circuit for Bottas, more so than Hamilton. But, it would be nice to see Bottas up there this year. But Red Bull as well, as you said, yeah, can they back it up? What they did last year, they were on the podium with Ricciardo. But it just depends, you got that third DRS zone there between turns 1 and 3 to add to the overtaking opportunities, and it's a very short layout anyway, so expect a lot of lapped cars in the mix as well, perhaps giving that DRS boost and everything. So yeah, it'll be a pretty, it should be a cracker of the race, more so than France was, even though France was still pretty entertaining in the end.
Yeah, just the way the circuit flows, and plenty of good opportunities to overtake there in that run up to turn 4. Turn turn 3, turn 4, they gave that little kink beforehand and official status. So you could say there, the run into turn 6, they're both really ideal for the last of the late breakers.
Yeah, so even, like that's why I said, between turns 1 and 3, because turn 2 sort of comes in between the DRS zone that they've added in there. So, and what, I guess, when it comes to these double headers, triple headers or whatever, and separating contenders from pretenders, that's where I feel like the midfield teams sort of get caught out a bit more, and whether, can Renault back up what they did last weekend, or can they go a bit better? The likes of McLaren, Force India, who didn't score points on that weekend, can they turn their luck around? I mean, McLaren not have typically gone well. I mean, Jenson Button was, I think, for McLaren Honda, was third here one year when he's on the grid, that is, due to penalties or whatever. So he still had a good qualifying, but just dropped away, of course, as you'd expect in the race. So could they possibly score points? Renault's there, Force India, Haas as well. I guess a bit disappointed with Grosjean. They were better than Canada. They were better in France than they were with Canada. So could this be their weekend? And Sauber too. Charles Leclerc. It's every race. It's just like, what can this guy do? This would be great.
Yeah, show me the money. But I think for Renault, the intrigue there, this really much mooted upgrade, which has been in the works since last season. You could say that on some of those the back straights, if they've got a handy package there, and with those customers not taking up that option, maybe this is their chance to edge closer towards Red Bull, and that would be fascinating to see if it makes Red Bull regret being a little bit conservative there, and whether it was worth the wait for this upgrade, and whether it really puts Renault into that echelon where they're well and truly looking like they're going to be gnawing away, you could say, at Red Bull, rather than just being in that purgatory between those top 3 and then the rest who rely on a lot of luck.
Oh, Red Bull, they shouldn't deserve any more upgrades anyway, given the fact that they've made their mind up for 2019 and it's not with Renault. So that'll be great to see Renault get a good result this weekend as well. So, I guess that wraps up the preview. Let's do sporting moments of the week before we wrap things up for this week. And of course, we had State of Origin on last week, or on Sunday, that is, before the race, and New South Wales took the victory in Game 2. They wrapped up the series, their first series win since 2014. But for me, my moment of the week, even though it was great to, being the Queensland fans that we are, it was great to see them win with a fresh new team. I thought Kalen Ponga's debut for Queensland was, one of the best debuts I've seen in a long time. Like, this is a kid who was brought on. They didn't know which position he'd play and everything. He's normally fullback. They said, all right, you go out as a loose forward, but he was basically playing every position. He wanted to tackle everyone. I think he ended up with 30 tackles in the end coming off the bench. He just wanted to be involved in every single play. Just the determination of this kid, he's like a little pest that doesn't go away, and I was just like, yes, this is so good to see, even though I'm still gutted that the Cowboys let him go at the to the Newcastle Knights this year. This is a player that's going to have a big impact for Queensland in the future, and especially with Billy Slater, Darius Boyd both having announced their retirements from rep footy at the end of this year. You'd expect come next year's series that Ponga will be the automatic number 1 at fullback for the team for the next series. So that was my moment. How about you for this week?
Yeah, just briefly on that one. Good to see they're ushering in that new talent, and probably the series Queensland needed to drop just to put a definitive line through the past glories. And you can see that it was a great spectacle, that second game. Both teams were worthy victors, and New South Wales clearly wanted it badly enough. So credit to them with their reformed squad there, headed by Brad Fittler. It was much deserved, and they just seem like they go about it in a much better way than they ever did previous eras. You could say many coaches, a revolving door there where they just couldn't quite get over Queensland. So for them, massive congratulations, really, and whether they can continue, it's the next question. Since they've saw 2014, they're obviously Queensland bounced back immediately. So for them, it'll be about continuing this momentum. They'll want to make a clean sweep of it to say that it was it was theirs really well and truly. But as to my own moment of the week, I'd say that Adam Treloar, as much as it wasn't a good outcome, it just shows you the way that football does work. A very rare injury at that, with the multiple hamstrings being torn in varying degrees, and big loss. It's now confirmed with the surgery required to at least one of those, and it just reminds you that football can be quite fickle, and really, when you think about the rivalry that it was on the day against Carlton there, probably a bit of a dramatic backdrop to the ultimate victory, and it just shows you that strange things can go on in the sporting landscape, and good luck to him in his recovery, and hopefully there's a chance he will return if Collingwood's fortunate enough to be there in September.
Well, yeah, just unfortunate too, considering already the injuries that the team has had since the start of the season, and you'd hope that Treloar's loss doesn't take away from the team in that run to the finals, sitting pretty in the position that they are. But I think when we were at that Melbourne game a couple of weeks ago, that their little run at the moment, their next 3 games look pretty favourable. You'd think that they'd win those. I think you've got Gold Coast up next or whatever, and then Essendon after that. So you'd think with those teams in their trouble that even with the loss of Treloar, you guys still can win those games, and then hopefully when those tougher games come up, you're in a good enough position that even if you lose them, you're still sitting pretty in the top 8.
Even that Essendon game, they've won 4 of their past 5, so it's not one to be treated too lightly.
Yeah, that's true. That's one thing I forgot about, the fact that they've actually won 4 of the last 5. But yeah, they're a bit hot and cold, you could say, those guys. So if, they were to lose one, perhaps it'll be against Collingwood.
Yeah, fingers crossed from my end. Certainly I'll be happy if they won this weekend and got ahead of themselves. But yeah, 1 week at a time, the old cliche. So plenty of depth there. It's good to see from Collingwood. Unlike the past, they seem like they're capable of continuing on the job. Yeah,
at least you can be happy about your football team, as we had the rep round on in the rugby last week. We finally get back into NRL footy this weekend, and yeah, Cowboys are playing the Rabbitohs, and I'm not very confident about that Sunday fixture against a strong Rabbitohs side with all the Origin players and I guess the English players backing up as well after the rep round that they had. I mean, I'm just annoyed that they didn't get left behind in Denver like the New Zealand guys did, the Burgess brothers, that is. So anyway, let's wrap things up for this week. We'll be back to preview our 3rd leg of this triple header next week when we wrap up the race in Austria, and then of course look forward to Silverstone, sunny Silverstone, we hope. Anyway, thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you guys.
And a quick shout out as well before we halt the streaming. A quick shout out to my mate Dion and many others making the trip up north today and incoming days for the Gold Coast Marathon on Sunday. It's a nice little odyssey for those guys, I think, to get that little tropical paradise. A good excuse to go and torture themselves with 42.2k. The humidity will be a factor there, and a lot of them are hoping for personal best. It's quite a competitive course, very much tending towards fast personal best times, so expecting to see a lot of satisfied times streaming through sometime late Sunday morning, and then interesting stories on all of their return. They've all got their own objectives to achieve, so it's always just nice to see the way people progress over the months when you talk to them, and then see when they come away from it how the entire getaway goes. Certainly a little bit envious, you could say, from a personal point of view.
Why didn't you go
up north?
Yeah, you should have gone then, totally.
Yeah, probably still not quite there after Great Ocean Road, but we're getting there. So to those guys, yeah, good luck.
Yeah, cool. Good luck to them, and we'll hear about it next week, I'm sure. So thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you guys for our Silverstone preview next week.
Till then.